So in looking how a script gets written and then how it gets translated by the artist, we're going to look at the Odyssey of Sgt. Jack Brennan, a book written by Brian Doerries that I helped edit, and some of our artists that saw help to work on. So it started, oops, here we go. It started with a script. Brian has a playwriting history, but has never written a comic before, and he does exactly what I ask you to do, which is to say what the image is and say what the text is. Say what the image is and say what the text is. What is the image? What is the text? And so he imagines the first page to be a splash page. A squad of Marines gather around a smoke pit, etc., etc. Here's the text. 3 different Marines. 4. Why does he want us here again? He wants to tell us a story, etc., etc. And then the last, I want you to notice this. Shh, here he comes. Next panel, Sergeant Brennan approaches. Brennan says, "Thanks for showing up, guys. You were voluntold, I know, but still." And that's panel 2. Panel 3. A few of the Marines spit chewing tobacco into the dirt. He places his boot on a cinder block and leans forward. Brennan speaks again. "Right before my first deployment in '05, my father, who never talked about Vietnam, took me aside and said, 'Son, the war doesn't end until the last veteran dies.' At the time I had no idea what he meant, but now I think I understand." New panel. Cut to 4th of July party in suburban San Diego neighborhood. Brennan speaking. "About a year after I got back from my second deployment to Iraq, an old high school buddy invited me over for a 4th of July cookout." Here's another image. Brennan awkwardly makes his way through the crowd in search of a beer. Brennan's excuse me. Caption again. "People were drinking and laughing, mostly civilians, talking about reality TV and the latest smartphone app." And we'll stop right there. That's enough to get us going. You can see how Brian has really thought this out. He's thought about the images he wants. He's thought even in certain circumstances how he wants it on the page. He wants the first image to be a splash page. And he's imagined the text. Now, it seems pretty straightforward to just do exactly what he says, but he handed it off to Jess Ruliffson, who's very trustworthy. She's a smart cartoonist, but has also worked with this material before. Here's her sketch for the first section that he mentioned. Pretty much exactly the same. But you'll notice that "shh, here he comes" isn't on this. She actually moves this "shh, here he comes" over to the new page in the first panel where Brennan's approaching. So she's already changing the script a little. And now she's also broken this up into 2 panels. "Thanks for showing up, guys. You were voluntold, I know, but still. Right before my first deployment in '05. So this becomes 2 panels in Jess's hands. And in fact, if I remember correctly, this, according to Brian, was part of the first part of that panel too. "My father, who never talked about Vietnam, took me aside," etc., etc. She has given us an image of that memory. Brian didn't ask us to do that. It was Jess's contribution. And here we have that last section. After a year, which is precisely how Brian describes it. He's moving through the crowd, trying to get a beer. "About a year after I got back from my second deployment in Iraq, an old high school buddy invited me over for a 4th of July cookout. People were drinking, laughing, mostly civilians, talking about reality TV and the latest smartphone app." So that is her thumbnails, her roughs for that she pitched to Brian. And I don't exactly know in what order some of these things happen, but there are a couple other changes that are about to come. And one last thing I want you to see is that Jess is already stripping in the text because she wants to know that the text is going to fit. She's got a problem here where it's over top of the character, so she's going to have to deal with that. The next round is that the pencils started to look like this. And now she's got room for all that text. She's still planning. This looks a lot like our rough. Now she's moved Sergeant Brennan over to the right to get room for that text over there, but pretty much we're looking at the same thing. She's starting to fit all that text in there. She's staying. So Brian must have approved this because he had a lot of control over this particular project. He must have said, "Yeah, those look good. Those changes you made, I love them. Let's keep going." And there's Brennan moving through that crowd, moving through that party, trying to get a beer as people were talking about smartphone apps. And then Jess's next step would have been to finish. And for some reason, and I don't remember why, they added this inset panel. I presume the answer is that they went back and forth and said, we need to see those characters earlier. We need to get a feel for the 4 different Marines and who they are, and just a feel for their personalities. So let's keep that big splash page, but let's move it up a little. You'll notice everything got moved up a little. And let's throw in this inset panel where we can see the faces of the Marines in it, because it's a little more important, because they're all going to become important in the later parts of the graphic novel. This part all is the same. And certain coloring choices, certain finishing choices get made at this point. Somebody pointed out that this has a really extremely melancholy, dark feel to it, because it's this black field here. It's not a house. It's not wallpaper. It's darkness behind them, and so certain additional stylistic choices got made even in the finishes. And then there's that last section, Brennan looking for the beer, moving through. There's the text added. And you'll see here lots of other choices, and you can scroll through there because there's a few more pages. You'll see where she's looking for panels that don't have borders, where she's doing all sorts of different options. And you can compare the script and the pencils, and the roughs and the pencils and the finishes for about 12 pages, I think. So have fun at that. And notice especially, though, the important thing to have noticed is how that script, that extremely well thought out, extremely smart script, was still kind of a first draft, because when the artist came back, there were some changes that helped the story, that really enhanced the narrative content.